My mother's last words to me before my wedding were not "I love you." They were "Don't expect us there." I hung up the phone, walked to the bathroom, fixed my veil in the mirror, smiled at my own reflection because I was the only person in that room who knew the whole truth, and I had known it for a very long time. I want to tell you this story, not to explain myself, not to ask you to take my side, though I suspect you will. I want to tell it because there is something I have been carrying around in my chest for the past 2 years, something that needs to be said out loud to someone who will actually listen. So, here it is. I'm going to start not at the beginning, but at the part where it matters. A Tuesday morning in early March 2 years ago, I was on a job site in the western part of Buncombe County, a commercial development. 12 acres of raw land that a developer wanted turned into something that looked like it had always belonged there. My job as a landscape architect is essentially to design the illusion of nature. I study the light, the drainage, the existing root systems, the way water moves after a hard rain. Then I tell people where to put things so it all looks inevitable. I was crouched near the eastern boundary of the site, taking notes on a stand of tulip poplars someone had flagged for removal, when I heard boots in the gravel behind me. I didn't turn around right away. I was writing, and when I did, there was a man in a yellow hard hat standing about 10 feet away, looking not at me but at the tree line. He was somewhere in his late 30s. Work clothes, real ones, not the kind bought for aesthetics. His hands were doing the thing hands do when someone has spent years with tools, slightly curved at rest, like they're always about halfway through a job. "Those aren't pigeons," he said. I looked at him. Then at the trees. There were birds moving in the upper canopy. "I know," I said. "They're killdeer." He glanced at me then, reassessing slightly. "Charadrius vociferus," he said. "They fake broken wings to protect their nests. You put ground disturbance equipment in that corridor before they've raised their young, you'll have a problem." "I know," I said again. A pause. The gravel shifted under his boots as he turned to face the site properly. "I'm Daniel Hargrove," he said. "I'm in charge of the infrastructure phase." "Claire Mercer," I said. "I'm in charge of making sure the infrastructure phase doesn't kill anything that doesn't need killing." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like an acknowledgement. "Fair enough," he said. That was it. He walked away. I watched him go not because he was particularly striking, though he was, but because something about the way he'd said "fair enough" sat in my mind and stayed there, like a word you look up and then keep finding everywhere. We ran into each other 3 more times on that job site over the following 2 weeks. Each time, he said something that was technically about work, and somehow also not. The third time, he told me the old drainage system under the east lawn had been installed backward, and that whoever designed the original grade had probably never stood in the site after a rain. "Have you?" I asked. "I was here at 6 in the morning last Thursday," he said. "After that storm, the water pools right here," he pointed, "and right here. You're going to want to raise this grade about 4 inches, or your planting beds will drown in the first wet season." He was right. He was completely right. I had the soil test to confirm it. "How do you know that?" I said. "You're in infrastructure, not landscaping." He looked at me with an expression I would come to recognize mild, patient, slightly amused at the implication that his knowledge had a border. "I started as a plumber," he said. "Water goes where gravity tells it to. That doesn't change depending on what you're building." I looked at him for a moment. Then I wrote down his correction in my site notes. He asked me to dinner that Friday. I have brought exactly 3 men home to meet my family in my entire adult life. This is not false modesty or a tragic backstory. It is simply a fact about the standards my mother runs, and what it costs to attempt them. The first man was in my late 20s. An architect, good family, good income, wrong in every other way imaginable. My mother approved of him within 15 minutes. The relationship lasted 8 months and ended badly. The second was a professor. Brilliant, warm, completely unsuitable in all the ways that matter to Patricia Mercer. She found reasons. She always finds reasons. The point is, I had Thamfindu sets them and what passing them actually gets you. I told none of this to Daniel. What I did tell him, over the course of several months of dinners and Saturday mornings and long drives on the Blue Ridge Parkway, was the truth about almost everything else. What I wanted out of my work, what I was afraid of, the way I sometimes drove to a job site at dawn just to be somewhere quiet before the day started, the fact that I had a complicated relationship with my family that I did not yet know how to simplify. He listened, not the way people listen when they're waiting for their turn to speak. The actual kind where afterward they remember what you said 3 weeks later and ask a follow-up question. 6 months in, he told me the rest of what he was. It happened on a Thursday evening at his apartment in Charlotte, a place that would have told you everything about him if you'd known how to look. No marble countertops, no gallery lighting, good furniture, worn the way furniture gets when it's actually used. Bookshelves with technical manuals next to dog-eared paperback thrillers. On the kitchen counter, a professional-grade coffee maker, a set of Allen wrenches in a magnetic strip where other people keep their knife block, and pinned to the refrigerator, with a magnet shaped like the state of North Carolina, a printout of a Forbes magazine article. Someone had written on it in pen, in handwriting I would later recognize as his. Call Mike Ree, Raleigh drainage specs before Thursday. The article itself was face down. I noticed it but didn't ask. He sat across the table from me and said, without particular drama, "There's something I should tell you. It's not that I've been hiding it. It's that I wanted to wait until I knew it wouldn't be the reason you were here." I put down my fork, he told me. I sat with it for a long time. Not from shock, the information itself wasn't entirely surprising once I had it. What I was sitting with was the realization that this explained nothing about who he was, and nothing about who I wanted him to be. "Did you want a different reaction?" "I didn't know what to expect," he said. I'm not most people," I said. The corner of his mouth moved again. That same not quite smile. "No," he said. "I've noticed." I drove home that night, with the windows down, despite the cold, thinking not about what he'd told me, but about a conversation I'd had with my best friend, Wren, the week before. She'd said something I'd filed away without quite understanding it yet. You can't love people into being who you need them to be, Claire. You can only love them and see what they choose. I had assumed she meant Daniel. Sitting at a red light on I-26 with the March air coming through the windows and the city glittering in every direction, I began to wonder if she'd meant someone else entirely. I made a decision before I reached my exit. Not to keep his secret, he'd never asked me to. He was not a man who needed protecting. I made a decision about what I needed to know. Let me tell you about the first time I brought Daniel home. I called my mother on a Wednesday afternoon in early October, about 5 months after that Tuesday on the construction site. I was in my car outside a coffee shop, engine running, because I had learned long ago that certain conversations with Patricia Mercer are best conducted while in motion, or at least while having the option to be. "His name is Daniel Hargrove," I said. "He works in water infrastructure contracting." 2 seconds of silence. The kind of silence my mother uses the way a surgeon uses a scalpel precisely, intentionally, to open something. "And is that?" She paused. "A stable field?" "Very," I said. "Well." Another pause, shorter this time. "We'll see." I drove home with the heat on and the radio off. The dinner was set for a Sunday in November. My mother had changed the tablecloth. I noticed it as soon as we walked in. The everyday blue one was gone, replaced by the ivory linen she brings out for people she is trying to impress or evaluate, depending on the night. The distinction, in my experience, is not always clear until dessert. Daniel had come straight from a site visit in Rutherford County. He'd changed jeans, a dark green shirt, work boots that were clean, but still obviously work boots. But his truck was his truck. A Navy Ford F, 250, with a company logo on the passenger door that said Hargrove Infrastructure Solutions in letters, small enough that you'd have to be looking for them to read them. He'd brought a gift basket from Whole Foods, the kind with a raffia bow and a paper tag with a handwritten note inside. He held it out to my mother at the door, with both hands, the way you'd hand something to someone you're genuinely trying to give it to, and said, "I picked these up on the way. I wasn't sure what you liked." My mother accepted it with the smile she reserves for people she has already decided about. "How thoughtful," she said. My father, Gerald, shook Daniel's hand in the hallway, that particular kind of handshake men use to take stock of each other, and said, "Come in, come in," which is what he says when he doesn't know what else to say. My sister Jennifer arrived 7 minutes late, kissed my cheek without quite making contact, and assessed Daniel in the way she assesses everything, quickly, with criteria she's never written down but has always been very clear about. The four of them sat down. I helped my mother bring out the food. So Daniel, my father said, once we were all settled, he was doing the thing he does at the beginning of a meal with someone new, where he leans slightly forward and folds his hands, like a man conducting an interview he didn't ask to be in charge of. "What kind of contracting exactly?" "Water infrastructure," Daniel said. "Utilities mostly, treatment systems, distribution networks. We also handle some commercial drainage and flood mitigation." "And there's demand for that?" my father said. "Enough to keep us busy," Daniel said. My father nodded slowly, the way he nods when he's filing something away. "And you're the company? Is that local? Asheville-based?" "Headquartered in Charlotte," Daniel said. "But we work across the Southeast, mostly. North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia. Some federal contracts." "Federal contracts," my father repeated, with the tone of a man trying to locate these words on a map of his expectations and finding them slightly off to the left of where he thought they'd be. My mother had said almost nothing. She was cutting her chicken. Across from me, Jennifer was doing something on her phone under the table. I knew this because of the specific angle of her chin and the careful stillness of her upper body. She has never mastered the art of being subtle about it. I watched her scroll and stop. Her brows pulled together. She scrolled more. Her face settled into the expression she makes when something fails to confirm what she already believed. She set the phone face down on her thigh and reached for her water glass. "You know," she said brightly, "I was looking you up just curious, and I couldn't find much. You barely have a social media presence." "I know," Daniel said. "I've never really seen the point." "That's so interesting," Jennifer said, in the voice she uses for things she does not find interesting at all. The conversation moved on. "It does. At my mother's table, she has a gift for guiding it the way a river guide steers a raft. Smooth adjustments you don't notice until you realize you're somewhere different from where you started." Daniel answered every question simply and without elaboration. Where he was from, what his parents did, where he went to school. He wasn't performing modesty, he just answered what was asked and waited for the next question, the way someone does when they have nothing to arrange. At some point during the main course, he looked out the bay window at the back garden. There was a long pause. "You've got a drainage issue," he said, not accusingly, just as a matter of fact. "See how the grass has yellowed in the southeast corner? That's standing water. The pipe has a low point that's collecting instead of moving. It's probably been doing that for a few seasons." My mother looked at the window, then at Daniel, then back at her plate. "Yes," she said. "We've been meaning to look at that. It's not a big fix," he said. "Half a day, maybe." She said. The conversation moved on again. After dinner, Daniel said goodbye in the driveway with the ease of someone who is entirely comfortable with the fact that a room has not warmed to him, not because he didn't notice, but because he has, at some point in his life, decided that a room's temperature is the room's problem. He shook my father's hand again. He thanked my mother for dinner. He looked at me with an expression that said several things at once without saying any of them. Got in his truck and drove away. My mother and I stood at the kitchen sink. She washed. I dried. We do this the same way we have done it since I was 8 years old, standing on the step stool, and nothing about it has ever changed. He seems very earnest, she said. She said earnest the way you say a word you've chosen precisely because it can mean two things. He is, I said. And you're serious about this? It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. She set a pan in the drying rack and looked at me directly, the way she does when she wants to make sure something lands. I just worry about you, sweetheart. You know how I am. I do, I said. I dried the pan. I hung up the dish towel. I drove home in the dark with all the windows up and the heat on, thinking about what she'd said and what she'd meant, and how those two things had almost nothing to do with each other. My mother called on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the dinner, not to talk about Daniel specifically. That's not how she does it. She called to talk about a neighbor's renovation, and then about a cousin's daughter who had just gotten engaged to a man who worked in finance, and then naturally, inevitably, the way water finds its level about me. I've been thinking, she said, about Daniel. I assumed, I said. Claire, sweetheart, I'm not saying he's not a nice man. She paused. She does this the way a pianist pauses before the difficult passage, not from uncertainty, but to make sure you're paying attention. I'm saying, think about what you're choosing. For your life, I was standing at my kitchen window. The tree in the backyard had gone fully yellow overnight, the way they do in the mountains one morning bare, the next blazing. What would you need to see from him, Mom? I said, specifically. What would be enough? Another pause. Longer this time. And then she told me. She talked about career trajectory. She talked about connections. She used the phrase the right circles without any apparent awareness of how it sounded. She talked about what a person's background says about them, about long-term stability, about what people see when they look at a couple and the impression that makes, and how impressions matter more than people like to admit. I listened to all of it. What I was hearing underneath the words was something else. A list with no end, a standard that moved, a bar set not to be cleared but to keep the jumper in place. That's not him, I said when she finished. So what are you actually saying? Silence. The real kind. I'm saying, she said finally, carefully, that we didn't raise you to settle. She said settle the way you'd say, a word you've tested in private before bringing it out in public, satisfied it would land the way you intended. I looked at the yellow tree. Good night, Mom, I said. Claire, I'll talk to you soon. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a while, not thinking about anything in particular, just watching the tree. Something had clarified, not changed, clarified. Like a photograph coming into focus, showing you a thing you'd already half seen. My sister called 2 days later. Jennifer comes at things from a different angle than my mother, which is to say she doesn't approach them at all. She just stands nearby and says whatever she's thinking, and the effect is sometimes gentler and sometimes considerably worse. I'm just saying, she said, which is how she begins sentences she knows she shouldn't be saying. A plumber, Claire. Seriously, you have a master's degree. What does my degree have to do with who Daniel is? It has everything to do with what people see when they look at you together. What people? A pause. Not my mother's kind of pause, just Jennifer running out of road. I don't know. People. The ones who matter. Which people are those, Jen? She sighed. The sigh of someone who finds it exhausting to explain the obvious. You know what I mean. I really don't. She let it go, after a while dropped it like a subject in a language she'd decided wasn't worth learning. We talked about other things. I told her the wedding date. I asked if she'd be there. She laughed. Actually laughed, quick and surprised. Like the question was more absurd than she'd expected. Honestly, she said, I'd rather miss my own funeral. No offense. None taken, I said. She texted me 40 minutes later. P.S. I looked him up again more carefully. Says 12,000 plus employees on LinkedIn. What does that even mean? Is that a lot? For plumbing, I read it twice, put my phone in my pocket, took it back out. I texted back, "Yes, Jen. That's a lot." She didn't respond. I told Daniel that weekend. We were at his kitchen table on a Sunday evening. He'd made pasta, which he does methodically and without commentary, the way he does most things, and I laid it out. The call from my mother, the conversation with Jennifer, the texture of it, the specific shape of what was being asked of me, and what I was declining to provide. He listened the way he always listens, completely without filling the gaps. When I finished, he said, "You don't have to protect me from your family." "I know," I said. "I mean it. If you want to tell them if it would make things easier." "It's not about making things easier," I said. He looked at me, waiting. "I'm letting them answer a question," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind was picking up. You could hear it in the kitchen window frame. A sound Daniel had been meaning to fix for 3 weeks and had not yet gotten to, which was unusual enough that I'd noticed it. He is not a man who leaves things unfixed for long. "What question?" he said. I picked up my fork. "I'll tell you when they've answered it." He looked at me for another moment. Something moved through his expression, not quite concern, not quite amusement. Something in between that I didn't have a name for yet. "Okay," he said. That was all, just, okay. I have thought about that a lot since. How much room there is in a word like that, when someone says it and means it. How different it is from the versions of okay that actually mean I disagree, or I'm letting this go for now, or we'll see. Daniel's okay was just, I hear you, I trust you, I'm here. I had a friend named Ren who once told me she'd spent 3 years trying to get that kind of okay from her own family, before she understood it wasn't something they were able to give. She said it so plainly, without self-pity, that it had taken me a while to understand how hard it must have been to say. She'd come to the wedding, she told me. Front row, if I wanted. She had the date in her calendar already. I thought about her as I drove home that night. And about my mother, and about Jennifer's text sitting unanswered on my phone, and about the fact that in 6 weeks I was going to get married, and the people who were supposed to be there might not be. I thought about all of it, and then I thought, I've been making decisions based on what other people might choose for 33 years. Time to make one based on what I will. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday, 7 days before the wedding. My mother called at 7 in the evening. My father was on the line too. I could hear his breathing. That particular careful quiet of a man who has been asked to be present for something he'd rather not be present for. They had planned this together. Or rather, my mother had planned it and my father had agreed to stand nearby. "Claire," she said, "we've talked about this enough." "We have," I said. "If you go through with this, we won't be there." I was in my kitchen. I had been making tea, the kettle had just clicked off, and I remember the steam rising from the spout and the way it disappeared before it reached the ceiling. Just gone. Absorbed into the air without a trace. "Then I'll see you when I get back from the honeymoon, Mom," I said. A short silence. "Don't do this, Claire." "Good night, Mom." I set the phone on the counter next to the kettle and stood there for a while. The tea steeped. I didn't drink it. There's a kind of calm that isn't peace. It's what's left over when you've been expecting something for so long that the arrival of it has nowhere to land. The grief doesn't come right away. It waits. My father called back 40 minutes later. Just him this time. No second line. His voice was quieter than usual. Not small exactly, but the way a voice gets when the person speaking it is aware they are not doing enough. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said. "I don't know what to tell you. Just say you'll be there, Dad." I said it simply. Not a plea, a question with only one useful answer. Just that. A long pause. Long enough that I counted seconds without meaning to. "Your mother feels very strongly," he said. "I know she does." I kept my voice level. "Do you?" Silence. Not the kind my mother uses, calculated, weighted, a tool. My father's silence was the other kind. The kind that means the answer is, No, but he cannot say no. And yes, would be a lie. And so there is just the open air between us and the specific grief of a person who loves you and has never once let that love make him brave. I'll talk to you soon, Dad, I said. Claire, drive safe. I hung up and sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, I just didn't make it to a chair. My back against the cabinet, knees up, the cold tile through my jeans. I sat there until the tea was cold and the kitchen got dark, and I remembered I hadn't turned on a light. Then I stood up, poured the tea out, and went to pack my overnight bag for the hotel. The night before the wedding, Ren fell asleep at 9:30, which she had been apologizing about in advance since Tuesday. She had an early flight the next morning after the ceremony, a work thing she couldn't move, and she needed the sleep. I told her I was fine. I was fine. I lay in the hotel bed for 2 hours listening to her breathe from the other queen and watching the ceiling do nothing, and at 11:15 I got up and went to the bathroom and closed the door very gently. I sat down on the floor, back against the cool side of the tub. The tile was white and the grout was gray, and the nightlight above the outlet threw just enough glow to see by without being useful. Outside the window, 3rd floor, Asheville, there was the occasional sound of a car on the wet street below. Rain earlier, not now. I didn't plan to cry. I never plan it. It plans me. It came the way it always comes for me, quietly and without announcement, just a sudden pressure behind my eyes, and then the tears already there, already moving. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose and let it happen. I was not crying about the wedding. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it sounds the night before, alone in the bathroom, and you'd assume. But it wasn't fear. It wasn't doubt. What it was grief, and the grief was specific. It had a shape and a location and a year attached to it. I was 16, and his name was Marcus, and he had hair that fell across his forehead when he laughed, and a laugh that started in his chest and worked outward, and he was the first person who had ever made me feel like I was interesting. Not as a project, not as a reflection of something else interesting. Himself. He thought I was funny. He read the same books I read and had opinions about them. He lived 6 blocks away, and his father kept bees. My mother sat across from me at the breakfast table one morning and said, "We are not those people." Claire and I understood without being told exactly what would happen if I disagreed. 2 weeks later, I called Marcus and told him it wasn't working out. He said, "Oh, a small sound. Just that." And then nothing for a moment. And then, "Okay," I guess in a voice that was very careful and very young. And I said goodbye and hung up and stood in the hallway of our house for a long time, looking at the wall. I had not thought about that phone call in years. Sitting on the hotel bathroom floor the night before my wedding, it was the thing I was crying for, not Marcus himself, but the girl who made that call. The girl who decided at 16 that her mother's approval was something she had to maintain at whatever cost, and spent the next 17 years paying it. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to settle into my lower back and for the breathing to even out and for the crying to run its course the way it does when you let it, when you don't try to manage it or shorten it, but just sit with it until it's done. Then I stood up. I ran cold water over my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, the hotel mirror, slightly yellowish, the kind that shows you exactly what you look like, and I thought, I have been auditioning for their love my whole life, and I have never gotten the part. Not once. A long pause. Just me and the mirror and the quiet hotel and Ren asleep in the next room. I don't want the part anymore. It landed clean, the way true things do. Not a conclusion. I was working toward something that had been true for a long time and only just found the right air to breathe in. I turned off the faucet. There was a sound in the wall, the low singing of pipes. The kind of sound Daniel had told me once meant air in the line. He'd explained it to me the night he fixed the pipes under my bathroom sink, crouching with his tools for 20 minutes without complaining, then standing up and washing his hands and saying that should hold like it was nothing. Like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to show up and fix something and not need to be thanked for it. I stood in the bathroom doorway for a moment, listening. The sound settled. The pipes were fine. I went back to bed. I slept, which surprised me, and in the morning I got up, and Ren helped me with my dress, and I walked out of that hotel room toward the best decision I have ever made. The morning of my wedding, there were tulips on the windowsill, pink ones, in a glass I'd brought from home because the hotel didn't have anything with a narrow enough neck. I'd cut them from my own garden 2 days before, wrapped them in damp paper, and carried them in the back seat of my car the way you carry something fragile that also matters carefully, but without making a show of the care. They'd opened overnight, and they were fully open now, and when the morning light came through the gap in the curtains, it hit them at an angle that I thought I might remember for the rest of my life. Ren was already awake. She'd made coffee with the little in-room machine and left a cup on the nightstand on my side without waking me. And it was still warm when I reached for it, which means she'd been paying attention to what time I usually surface. That's Ren entirely. She notices things and does something about them, quietly, without expecting to be noticing. We didn't talk much while she helped me with the dress. There wasn't much that needed saying. She zipped the back, smoothed a fold at the waist, stood behind me, and looked at us both in the full-length mirror, the way you look at something you want to remember accurately. "Are you okay?" she said. I thought about it, not performing the thought, actually considering the question, because she deserved a real answer. "I'm about to marry the best man I've ever met," I said. "In the most beautiful place I've ever worked on. I'm better than okay." She put her hands on my shoulders for a moment. Just that. Then she stepped back and said, "Then let's go." The venue was a garden I'd helped design 2 years before the wedding, a commission I'd taken on a word-of-mouth basis, a private property on the eastern slope of the mountains outside Asheville. I'd spent 6 weeks on the planting plan alone, the layered beds of native grasses and late-blooming perennials, the stone path that curved rather than cut, the small grove of serviceberry trees along the north boundary that would be, I had calculated, in their last week of bloom in the 3rd week of April. I had done the math on the blooms. I had always known this was the place. The chairs were set in 2 sections with an aisle between them. I saw it as I came around the corner of the low stone wall, before anyone saw me. Daniel's side and my family's side. Daniel's was full, his mother in the front row already crying, her husband's hand over hers, his Uncle Kenny, who I'd met once at Christmas, and who had a voice that projected whether he meant it to or not, leaning sideways to say something to the man beside him. 6, 8, 10 rows of people, warm and noisy and spilling slightly into the aisle. A group of people who had known Daniel his whole life and shown up without being coaxed. My family's side, 6 empty chairs with small bundles of white freesia tied to the backs. I looked at them for a moment. One moment, just long enough to see them clearly. 6 chairs. The freesia was fresh. I'd asked the florist to do both sides the same regardless. Then I looked up, and there was Ren, already seated in the 2nd row of Daniel's side, because she'd asked me the week before which side she should sit on, and I'd said wherever you want, and she had apparently decided that where she wanted was as close to the center of things as she could get. She raised her hand when she saw me. Not a wave, just a lift, the way you signal to someone across a room that you see them and they are not alone. I fixed my veil in the compact mirror Ren had left in my bouquet bag, straightened it, put the mirror away. I walked. Daniel was standing at the end of the aisle with his hands loose at his sides and the particular expression I had learned to read over 2 years. Not a performance of emotion, just emotion itself, undressed. He looked at me the way I've never been looked at by anyone else, before or since. Like I was something he'd been trying to figure out the right word for, and had just found it. I took his hands when I reached him, and they were warm and slightly rough, and exactly right. The officiant kept the ceremony short, which I had asked for, because I have sat through too many ceremonies that confused length with meaning. Daniel had written his own vows. He held a small card but didn't look at it much. "Claire," he said, I've never needed anyone to know who I am. I've been comfortable with that for a long time. But I want you to know me. All of me, the whole thing. That's new. I've thought about why it's new, and the only answer I can come up with is you specifically. A pause. He was talking the way he always talks, which is to say he said what he meant and then stopped. I'm not going to be better at saying things like this than I am right now. So I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. I love you. That's the whole thing. I laughed. So did most of the people watching. Mine were shorter. I'd written them on the back of a receipt and memorized them on the drive over. Afterward, after the officiant pronounced us, and the small crowd from Daniel's side made the kind of noise that warm, unself-conscious people make when something they love goes right. We walked through the garden to the terrace for the reception, and I had the thought I'd promised myself I'd let myself have. This is the first time in my life that I brought someone home, and he was exactly who I needed him to be. Not who she needed. Who I needed. I let myself have it for about 4 seconds. Then there were people to greet and glasses to hold, and Daniel's mother pulled me into the kind of hug that communicates a whole relationship in under 10 seconds. Uncle Kenny gave a toast. He had, by this point, had 2 glasses of champagne and was on what I suspected was a third. And he stood up without being asked, which is the kind of person he is, and cleared his throat and said, "Now, I want to say something about this young man, because most people here probably don't know the half of it. I always said I said it for years. Anybody here can ask my wife, Linda. I always said that boy's going to end up fixing pipes for the governor. And look at him. Look at him. Dressed up real nice. Laughter. The warm, genuine kind. To Daniel and Claire," Kenny said, lifting his glass. "May your pipes always drain in the right direction." More laughter. Daniel shook his head once, slowly, and caught my eye. And the look on his face was a very specific kind of fond that I think I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Later, during cocktails, one of the rental tables near the bar developed a wobble. I saw Daniel notice it from across the terrace, that slight shift in his attention, the way his eyes tracked it, and then I watched him set down his glass, say something to the person he was talking to, and walk over. He crouched, looked at the base, went to his truck, which was parked at the far end of the lot, and came back 2 minutes later with a small tool I couldn't identify from across the terrace. He fixed the table in under 90 seconds. His cousin Marcus, standing beside me at that moment, watched this happen. "He does that everywhere he goes," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Just as a fact." "I know," I said. "That is the man I married, not the version of him that existed in other people's imaginations, assembled from numbers and headlines and what it all might mean. The man who crouches under a wobbly table at his own wedding reception with a tool he keeps in his truck. I had known that from a Tuesday morning in early March, 2 years before, when he'd looked at a corner of a job site and told me what the birds were and why they mattered. The rest, I had simply been waiting to confirm. We stayed in Asheville for the honeymoon, which some people thought was odd, driving 40 minutes from the wedding venue to a hotel in the same city. But Daniel had asked me where I wanted to go, and I'd said the mountains, and he'd said we're already in the mountains, and I'd said exactly, and that was that. 3 days of it. Long mornings and slow afternoons and evenings on the hotel balcony with the Blue Ridge going dark in layers, the near ridges first and then the far ones dissolving into the same color as the sky. We ate at a place Daniel knew on Lexington Avenue, where the menu was written on a chalkboard and changed daily. We hiked a trail I'd been meaning to do for 2 years and hadn't gotten to. We did not talk about the wedding, or my family, or the 6 empty chairs. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said by the chairs themselves. On the morning of the 3rd day, Daniel's phone rang at 8:47. I know the time because I was awake and watching the ceiling when it happened, in that particular morning state where you're conscious but not yet committed to the day. His phone was on the nightstand on his side, and the name on the screen, I could see from where I lay, was Mike Castellano, his COO, who had texted me on our wedding night to say congratulations and to apologize in advance for any work calls in the next week. Daniel looked at the phone, looked at me. "Take it," I said. He stepped out onto the balcony. I heard the low register of his voice through the glass door, but not the words. And then a longer silence, and then him again. When he came back in, he set the phone face up on the dresser and stood with his hands in his pockets for a moment. "The Forbes piece came out?" he said. "Ah," I said. We had known it was coming. He'd done the interview 6 months earlier. A long conversation with a writer in Charlotte who had been trying to profile him for 2 years. Daniel had agreed finally because his PR director had made a reasonable argument about the company's visibility and some contracts they were pursuing. He hadn't had any say in the timing. I sat up. He opened the laptop on the desk and turned it toward me. And there it was, a full-page photograph of Daniel in work clothes standing in front of a pipe installation somewhere in eastern North Carolina, looking at something off-camera with the same expression he uses when he's thinking through a problem. The headline was large, "From Pipe Fitter to Pipeline King. Daniel Hargrove's $2.3 billion infrastructure empire." Below it, a subheadline, "How a plumber from Western North Carolina built the Southeast's largest water infrastructure company and why he still drives a truck." I read the first paragraph. It was good writing. It was also, I realized, the reason his company logo on the truck door was small enough that you had to be looking for it. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. He wasn't looking at the screen. "They announced the NC contract this morning too," he said. "Mike says it's everywhere." "How everywhere?" He turned the laptop slightly. He'd opened a new tab. CNN. His photograph the same one, or a similar one, in the lower right corner of the screen, with a small headline about the infrastructure deal. He clicked to another tab, a local Raleigh station's website, then a Charlotte business journal, then a regional news aggregator with 4 separate stories. My phone, on my nightstand, lit up. We both looked at it. "How long has it been since the piece went up?" I said. "About 40 minutes, Daniel said. The phone lit up again, then twice more in quick succession. There is a feeling that does not have a name, or if it does, I have never found it. It is what you feel when something you knew was coming arrives, and it is exactly as you imagined it, and you discover that having imagined it correctly does not make it feel the way you thought it would. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was something rounder and more complicated, the way a scar feels when you press it present, specific, connected to something that hurt, but no longer hurting. I watched my phone light up again and did not move. Daniel picked it up. He looked at the screen with the expression he uses for problems not distressed, just attending. He started counting. He actually counted, methodically, scrolling through the notifications with his thumb. 73 from your mother, he said. 11 from your dad. 9 from Jennifer. He scrolled. 3 from someone listed as Aunt Carol. I looked at him. I don't think I have an Aunt Carol. He considered this. Would you like one? I put my face in the pillow for approximately 4 seconds. The kind of laugh that comes out of nowhere and catches you from behind, warm and slightly absurd, like the whole situation had suddenly become too large to hold without releasing some of the pressure. When I looked up, Daniel's expression was the same almost smile from the construction site 2 years ago, the one that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth. Then it went quieter. He set the phone down between us. "Claire," he said, "I'm sorry. I should have—" "No," I said. If I'd told them who I was before, no. I said it the same way, not louder. We did this the right way. All of it. They had the same information they needed. They made their choice. He looked at me for a moment. He does this, considers what you've said as though it deserves to be considered. Doesn't answer before he's ready. They're calling because of his name on the screen, I said. Not because of mine. He was quiet. It doesn't change what I know, I said. About who called and who didn't. Outside, the mountains were the same. The light was moving across the ridge the way it always does in the morning. Slowly, uncommitted, taking its time. My phone lit up again on the blanket between us, and I reached over and turned it face down on the nightstand. Then I picked up the room service menu from the bedside table and looked at it. "What do you want for breakfast?" I said. He took the other side of the menu. We ordered eggs. We ate them on the balcony. The mountains were very still. We came home on a Thursday. The house, Daniel's house, our house now, a craftsman-style place on a quiet road outside Asheville with a covered porch, and more land than either of us strictly needed, smelled the way houses smell when they've been closed for a week. Not bad, just still, like time had been holding its breath. I opened the windows and made coffee and unpacked my bags and spent the evening doing the ordinary things you do when ordinary life reconvenes, which it always does, which is both the comfort and the strangeness of returning from something large. 2 days after that, on a Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen cutting vegetables for soup when the doorbell rang. I knew before I answered it. I don't know how to explain the knowing I had not been expecting them, had no reason to expect them specifically on that Saturday, but when I walked down the hallway and looked through the narrow window beside the door, I was not surprised by what I saw. My mother and father on the front porch. My mother had dressed carefully. Blazer, good shoes, hair done. She was holding a gift bag with a green ribbon, ivory paper inside. My father stood one step behind her and slightly to the left, hands in his jacket pockets, in the posture he uses when he is following someone else's plan. Jennifer was not with them. I noted this and said nothing about it and opened the door. "Claire," my mother said. "Come in," I said. I made tea the way I always make it. Without asking, my mother drinks Earl Grey. My father takes whatever is offered. I moved through the kitchen while they sat at the table in the way people sit when they have prepared for a conversation and are waiting for the room to be ready for it. The gift bag went on the table. Nobody mentioned it. I brought the cups over and sat down across from them and waited. My mother set her hands flat on the table. She had a prepared version of what came next. I could see the shape of it the way you can see the shape of a room before you open the door. "Claire," she said, "we had no idea who Daniel was. And we feel absolutely terrible about how things were handled. And we want you to know—" "Mom," I said. She stopped. I let the word sit there for a moment. One of my own pauses, not hers. "I knew who Daniel was from the night we met," I said. "I knew his name, his company, and what was in his bank account. I have known for over a year. The room did something. Not a dramatic thing, just a small recalibration, the way air shifts when a window opens." My mother looked at me. My father looked at me. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. "You knew," my mother said. Not a question, she was processing. "I knew," I said, "and you didn't tell us." "No." She sat with this. I watched her mind working through it, the ESTJ recalculation, reordering the narrative, finding the frame that made the most sense of this new information. I have watched her do this my whole life. She is very fast at it. "Why?" she said. "Because I needed the answer to a question," I said. "Before I got married, I needed to know the answer, and there was only one way to get it." I looked at them both. My mother, her hands still flat on the table. My father, very still in his chair. "If he had been only a plumber," I said, "just a man who fixed pipes and drove a work truck and brought a fruit basket from Whole Foods. If that was all he was, and all he was ever going to be, would you have been there?" The room went quiet. The real kind of quiet, not the performing kind. My mother drew a breath. "You have to understand, we were concerned about your future, about stability, about—" "That's not the answer," I said. She stopped. "That's an explanation," I said. "I've had those. I know what those sound like. I'm asking a different question." She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not quite surprise, not quite recognition. Something between the two, something that hadn't fully arrived yet. "We were," she started. "Mom." One word. "Quiet." She stopped again. I turned to my father. He had been sitting very still this whole time, his hands in his lap now, eyes on the table. He does this when he doesn't know what to do and has run out of ways to delay having to decide. "Dad," I said, "in all those months, every time you heard his name, every time you saw the two of us together, was there one thing about Daniel that had nothing to do with money, that made you think, 'My daughter chose well'?" My father looked up. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who has been waiting for a question he has known was coming and has not prepared an answer for, because there is no prepared answer, only the real one. The silence stretched, long enough that I heard the kitchen faucet drip once, heard a car pass on the road outside, heard my own breathing. "Yes," he said. The word came out quietly, like something being handed over carefully. "What?" He looked down at his hands, then back up. "The way he looked at you," he said. Something in my chest moved. Not broke, moved, shifted, the way tectonic things move, deep and slow and final. I had not expected to cry, and I did not cry. But I felt the place where crying would have been, the specific geography of it. I had been waiting, I realized, not for my mother to apologize, but for my father to tell the truth. Those are not the same thing, and I had confused them for a long time. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. She was, I think, recalibrating again, trying to locate herself in a conversation that had moved somewhere she hadn't planned for. The kitchen door opened. Daniel came through from the back hallway. He'd been there the whole time, in the room off the kitchen where he keeps his tools, doing something I hadn't asked about. He did this without drama, without any particular timing, the way he moves through most situations, simply taking up exactly the space he requires and no more. He nodded at my mother. At my father. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," he said. My father looked up. There was something in his face when he saw Daniel, not shame exactly, but something adjacent to it. An awareness. Daniel looked toward the window that faced the back garden. The way he'd looked at that same window through a different pane of glass months ago, over a dinner that had gone a particular way. "I've been thinking about that drainage issue in your back garden," he said to my father, in the same easy tone he'd used the first time, as though months had not passed and nothing had changed in the interim. "Southeast corner, low point in the pipe. It's about a half-day fix. I could come out sometime, if you wanted." My father stared at him. Then, after a moment, "Yeah," he said. "Sure." Daniel nodded, got himself a glass of water from the tap, went back the way he came. The kitchen was quiet again. My mother looked at the door Daniel had walked through, then at me, then at her hands. "We can try," she said, finally, directly, without preamble. 3 words. Not an apology, not an explanation, not a repositioning. The plainest thing she'd said in years. I looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," I said. After Daniel went back to his tools, I sat with my parents for a while longer. My mother's hands were still on the table. The gift bag sat between us, still unopened, and neither of us moved to open it. There are gifts that are about the gift, and gifts that are about the giving, and this one had never been about either. It had been about arriving with something in hand, something tangible that said we came prepared, we came in good faith, and I understood that without needing to look inside. "I'm not angry at you, Mom," I said. She looked up. I was. For a long time, in different amounts. But that's not what this is now. I chose the words carefully, the way you choose tools for a specific job, not the ones you have, the ones you need. I'm done waiting for you to love me the way I needed to be loved. I found that. Without your permission, I want you to know that I know that. She said nothing. My father's hands moved slightly in his lap. "You're welcome in my life," I said. "In our life, but I need you to hear what that means before you decide if you want it." I looked at my mother, then my father, then back. "It means you come here and you see Daniel. And what you see is a man, not a headline, not a balance sheet, not a correction to an embarrassing story you have to tell people. A man, if you can't do that, I need you to tell me now, because I would rather know than find out over dinner. My mother's jaw tightened slightly. Claire, we understand. I'm not finished, I said. She stopped. In 33 years, I had never once said that to her. The room registered it, the way rooms register things that have not happened before. It means you call me because you want to talk to me. Not because something changed in the way the world sees my last name. It means if you come for dinner, you come for dinner not for an inventory of what's changed and what it all means for you. I kept my voice level. There was no satisfaction in this, only the particular relief of saying a true thing in full. Those are the terms. They aren't negotiable. And I'm telling you now so you can decide what you want. The kitchen was very quiet. My father said, That's fair, Claire. My mother looked at him, then at me. She pressed her lips together once briefly. We can work with that, she said. Not we will. Not of course. We can work with that which is, from my mother, a kind of honesty. She was not promising to become someone different. She was promising to try something hard. I have decided to take that for what it is. Jennifer did not come. I have not heard from her since the text about the employees. I note this without drama, because the absence is its own answer, and deserves to be heard as one. I walked my parents to the door. My mother hugged me briefly, the way she hugs when she is uncertain of the reception, a careful thing, arms not quite fully around. My father held on a moment longer. He smelled like the same aftershave he has worn my entire life, and I stood in it for a second longer than I needed to. I love you, Claire, he said into my hair. I know, Dad, I said. At the door, my mother paused. She looked back at the house, at the porch, the yard, the garden that was beginning to green up at the edges. It's a beautiful property, she said. I looked at it too. The serviceberry along the north boundary was just starting to leaf. I had noticed it that morning. It is, I said. Then I thought of something. Something Wren had told me months ago that I had filed away without understanding who it was about. I said it quietly, not to make a point, just because it was true, and it had just arrived at the right moment to be said. Wren told me once you can't love people into being who you need them to be. You can only love them and see what they choose. My mother looked at me. I thought she meant Daniel, I said. She didn't. I let them find their way down the porch steps. I watched the car until it turned off the road and was gone. Then I went inside and closed the door behind me. Daniel was in the kitchen. He was crouching in front of the cabinet beside the stove, the one with the hinge that had been stiff since we moved in, tightening something with a screwdriver in the particular focused quiet he inhabits when he's working. He hadn't heard me come in, or hadn't registered it. He was just there, doing what needed doing. The way he has always just been there doing what needs doing. I leaned against the doorframe and watched him. He has hands that know what they're doing. That's the only way I can say it. There's a kind of confidence in them that has nothing to do with performance, they just know. He crouched with his back to me for another minute, tested the hinge, opened and closed the cabinet door twice, nodded once to himself. Then he looked up and saw me. You okay? He said. Yeah, I said. He nodded, went back to putting his tools away. I stayed in the doorframe a while longer, watching him, thinking about the job site, the birds, the construction site gravel, the Forbes printout on the refrigerator with the sticky note about the project manager, the pipes that sang in the hotel wall the night before our wedding and then went quiet. All the small, specific things that had added up, one by one, to this. This kitchen, this man, this ordinary Saturday. That was mine. 97 missed calls. I still haven't returned any of them. But 2 days after my parents left, my father sent me a text. No explanation, no preamble. Just 3 words. I love you. I looked at it for a long time. Then I typed back. I know, Dad. And I meant both things at once. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop auditioning for love that was never going to be unconditional. Claire didn't win because her husband turned out to be wealthy. She won years before that the moment she decided that the people in her life would have to choose her without a reward attached. That's the thing nobody tells you. You can spend a lifetime making yourself more acceptable, more impressive, more enough, and it will never be enough for someone who needs you to be less than them to feel safe. The real question isn't whether your family approves of your choices. It's whether you do. And the day you can stand at the altar alone, fix your veil, and walk forward anyway, that's the day you find out who you actually are. Have you ever had to choose between someone you loved and the approval of people who were supposed to love you?